Welcome to the Hunting News Podcast. I'm your host, Steven Ziegler. I'm here with my co-host, Aaron Futrell. This podcast is brought to you by DeLong Lures because, well, we own DeLong Lures. So it's a big podcast today because we're going to talk about, did CWD kill 2 hunters after eating CWD-infected meat? There's a lot going on around online right now. We have a lot of good information. The Field and Stream article was put up. Within 3 hours, it was taken down. We found the source of that. Some people have found it. It's a urology.org. Neurology.org. Sorry,
That's a totally different area of the body.
Sorry. Neurology.org article. I have that one pulled up here. Beyond that, I made some calls. I talked to some people in the medical field. And basically, we got there's a PubMed article out there. There's a couple other ones that we're gonna have them all in the show notes so that you guys can see them. There's a CDC article. Not many people have referenced the PubMed one. It's the most in-depth one. I read the whole thing. We went through, checked all the references. We go into a bunch. There's so much here. So I want to make this as clear as possible for everybody that some people understand this, some people don't. But basically, CWD is a prion disease. It's a protein. We all have them. But what happens is it folds weirdly in the brain and turns your brain into Swiss cheese, basically, to make it as simple as possible. You know, it's a spongiform. It turns your brain into a sponge. It cuts holes in it. People start to hallucinate. They start seeing weird things. They can't focus. They report brain fog. Well, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, we have 2 clusters of cases really close together of 5 people. And they all got it. But there's so much more to the story. And if you think that you have an opinion on this like I did, by the time you get through this, your opinion will probably go back and forth a few times before you have a fully formed opinion on this. Everybody has biases, and they're natural. They happen. We all, I'm a hunter. I don't want this to be true. I don't want hunters to die from eating deer meat. That's bad for hunting. We have the Hunting News Podcast, the Sportsman Party, the Hunting News on Facebook. We have these big pages on Facebook. We've spent 10 years growing this stuff. The last thing I want to see is the hunting industry hurt. I really do. And I recognize that I have that bias a little bit here. But we're gonna go through the actual science, what we do know definitely, what we think we know, and even into the history of how mad cow disease, which is the same thing in cows, went to humans, how it's in deer, and how it could go to humans. And at the end, I actually have a solution that people hang in there with me, please. High fence deer hunters could solve this problem for us. You're going to have to hang in there. There's a lot to get to before we get to that point, but there is a potential solution for wild deer herds from high fence deer hunters that may stop CWD or slow its spread or completely eliminate it. And this has been scientifically proven. So we'll get into that though. So just to make things simple, we're going to break this down into 3 diseases. You have mad cow disease, which is EBS, right? It's something, I forget the acronym of it. It doesn't matter. It's mad cow disease. Mad cow disease is the prion disease in cows. Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease is the prion disease in humans. And CWD is the same thing in deer. Now, there was a jump. We proved that there was a jump. This is in the 80s and 90s, largely over in Europe.
Mainly in England.
Mainly in England, yeah, where the mad cow disease, people were eating beef, and they ended up getting Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease.
Creutzfeldt-Jakob's because it's
CJD.
Yeah, CJD. It looks like Jacobs, but it's Jakobs.
Yeah.
The scientist it was named after was German, so the J is pronounced like a Y, but yeah. Anyways.
So anyways, there's proof that it's happened to jump from cows to humans, but there's no definitive proof yet that it has jumped from deer to humans. However, we do have anecdotal evidence that suggests that it could have, and it's eerily similar to the same exact evidence if you go back and look in the 80s and 90s of how of how it jumped from cows to humans. It was doing it, and people were denying it, saying it didn't happen. There was cover-ups of it. People who had a bias towards making sure that there was more and more beef being sold had a bias, and it wasn't even that they were covering up. I don't want to say they were covering it up. What they were doing was they stood to make billions of dollars. And this is an important point from the beginning of this, because there was a Field and Stream article that was taken down, that was written. I'm not going to put the guy's name out there who wrote it. I've got all that research, but because I don't know everything behind it, and I don't want to impart any sort of motive towards people. But if you're Field and Stream or you're a hunting company, even like us, if you have a disease that people could believe is killing someone from hunting, it could cost a company like that millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars long term. So there is a very a push in the industry right now to say, hey, look, I love this industry. I love hunting. Let's pull this back until we know for sure that this is true.
Oh, yeah.
I actually don't think that that's an unfair thing to say.
No, it's not.
And to be fully transparent, if I had a CWD deer, I'd eat it. I'd eat it right now. I might eat it. But the more I've researched this, I would probably eat it. I'm not really that concerned. I'm not eating the brains. No. For example, my daughter this year, she did a video where I told her I'd give her $100 if she ate a deer eyeball, and she did it. Looking back, not a great idea, because that's where those preons are at.
Yeah, we also weren't in the CWD area either when you did that.
Yeah, but still, man, maybe my you only get. I only got 2 kids. I can only afford to lose one.
Yeah,
But anyways,
yeah. So, but also, I wouldn't be doing a neck roast with the spinal column still in it.
Yeah.
I would be deboning that. So I'd be, there's more precautions I would be taking if I was in a CWD area.
Yeah.
Even now in a CWD area, I wouldn't be, I'd be taking more precautions than I do when I kill a deer outside of the area. So even that's knowing, because right now, even before this, with the presumption that they may have jumped the species barrier.
Yeah.
If I was in a CWD area, not even knowing if my deer had it or not, I would still take those precautions of not eating any of the deer that had any of the spinal column, or I would be deboning all the meat and, taking the extra precautions. Yeah. I would still do that.
So there's some good science behind why we should do that when you look back at cows. And we'll get into that. But I think an important thing to distinguish here before we even get started is there's a lot of drama around CWD, and I want to bring up one thing that people are not that people have wrong on this. And I don't just mean like mostly hunters. A lot of hunters understand it, but a lot of them don't. The general public is scared of CWD. We've all seen the articles of the zombie deer disease, right? It was on Fox News, CNN. It was on New York Times. Like all these places shared this. They ran with this research.
Yeah, there's a huge video. There's a video of a deer stumbling around.
Yeah, that deer did not have CWD. No, there is a difference. There's 2 different deer diseases. We got to be clear on both of them: CWD and EHD. EHD, when you see deer, there's all these real decrepit deer. They're like starting to wither away. A lot of times you see them in water. It's because they get real high fevers. They don't always die from EHD, but they do a lot of times. You're talking, I think it's 80-90%. We're going to do a whole podcast on EHD and CWD comparisons later on for reference, and all the deer diseases, blue tongue, all that. So we're going to talk about it later on. But it's important to distinguish these 2 things, because what most people are scared of, they think is CWD, is not CWD. It's EHD. A lot of people get that wrong. You can follow us on the Hunting News on Facebook. We're going to put up some stuff on that coming up, so you can kind of, if you don't know the difference, we'll talk about it, and we'll do another podcast here hopefully really soon, because this is such a pressing issue. Yeah,
because EHD is way more prevalent. It's it pops up every single year in most of the states right around like August, September timeframes, just before hunting season. It's caused by these little tiny bugs called midges, and they pop out of the mud. Usually after it rains and it dries out, and they pop out and they start biting the deer, infect the deer with this virus, and within I think it has a 1 to 2 week incubation period.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the deer get this disease, and it takes about a month, and then they could die. 80 to 90%. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, and they die.
Yeah. So a big,
and they get that stumbling around and they start like losing weight because they can't eat. A lot of times it's also or it's blue tongue, and they're very similar diseases spread by the same type of midges, blue tongue or EHD, where they can't eat, they can't swallow, so they start to get all real skinny, and they start stumbling around, and everybody's like, oh, the deer are it's CWD, it's chronic wasting disease, they're wasting away. But
that's not how that works.
It's not how that works. It's
chronic wasting disease. The brain is wasting away, and now that can have some other consequences for sure. But we don't know exactly how long. So let's jump into let's go in chronological order here.
Okay.
What we know about just to start this discussion off, you have to basically bring it to mad cow disease back in England back in the 80s.
Yeah, started in the 80s.
So how this all came to fruition is that they were basically feeding cows to cows. Again, some of this is going to be a little vague. There is some nuance to some of these things. For time's sake, we're going to keep it, we're going to publish all the information. Even we listened to about 6 or 7 podcasts today on the history of mad cow disease, just to brush up on it a little bit. But basically, they're feeding cow parts to cows.
Yeah, they would take waste from like these like butchering facilities, like the bone meal and the fats, and they would dry them out and make this like protein powder out of cow waste, and then put it as protein supplements back into cow feed. So that's how feeding cows to cows. So the wasted parts of the cows would go back in as protein supplement to cows.
Yeah, because they were trying to save money. They were trying to.
Yeah, what has more protein than protein.
Yeah. Right. So basically, that happened. Cows started getting mad cow disease. They started acting all funny and weird, and there was no known transmission to humans. Now, this is a very similar argument to what's going on right now with CWD, where they would say, "Hey, there's no known transmission. There's no known transmission." This went on for
a decade,
10
at
years,
least.
10 to 15 years.
Yeah, give or take.
And it was very likely that it was being transmitted from cow. We know that at this point it's pretty conclusive. Although you can't go back and test somebody who died 10 years ago, we can see the evidence like, oh, well, we say for 10 years we have no conclusive evidence, and now all of a sudden we do. You look back on the last 10 years, you go, oh, well, of course.
It probably was.
Yeah.
But what makes it difficult is what's that, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, it occurs naturally in humans. It's like it can be genetic. It can also be genetic, hereditary, and there can be other causes that just pop up naturally and not be passed on through.
In fact, 80 to 85% of the cases of these proteins folding wrongly in humans, between 80 and 85%, are not from beef.
Yes.
99.9% of them aren't from beef. 80 to 85% of them are randomly occurring, right? This is this is according to the CDC article we have here that we're going to post. What happens is that it's just a genetic weird thing where the protein folds wrong. You start eating your own brain.
Yeah.
Now, another 5 to 10% are more of a genetic factor where you can track people's families and you can see that they have a genetic factor. And on the PubMed article I have pulled up here, it is the median age was 55. It was between 55 and 72. I have it on here.
So,
I'll highlight it.
That
older generations genetically tend to get it.
So that makes it difficult to track where, let's say, like ground zero would be for if a person was to contract it through eating deer meat or in mad cow disease eating beef.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, where did they contract it? Contract it. So was it, naturally? Did their bodies just all of a sudden start folding protein, which happens a lot because this disease is not unknown to the medical community? Where, are they, genetically predispositioned to start, to get this disease? Or did they get it from, the other category, such as eating beef? So, and it's very hard for them to eliminate the two most likely causes. You can't say, well, you can't look. It's like those are hard to eliminate. It's hard to say, your body just randomly. Did your body just randomly start, producing this protein wrong? It is probably almost impossible to eliminate that.
Also, are they lying to us? Like we listened to. It was funny. We're listening to a BBC podcast and she's like, people were wondering, can we trust the government? It's like, no, of course not. We know that you can't trust them. If you read, I don't know, let's reference any history book ever written. No, don't trust the government. Bad idea to just full sail trust them. They lied to them about knowing the cause of this disease. They did. It's very well, even looking back, some of them had admitted, yeah, we were kind of I was wondering if this is what the problem was, but we just kept saying it wasn't. And now the thing we got to worry about isn't do we have absolute conclusive evidence that CWD has jumped to humans. We do not have absolute conclusive evidence that it's jumped. However, we do have anecdotal evidence, and the article that most people are reading right now is the neurology.org article. It's very vague. It's very short. It's essentially a summary. Now, if you go into the CDC article and especially the PubMed article, it gets a little more in depth, and you can kind of see why they came up with that summary. So when people are saying, oh, well, it's just this vague article from April 9th, it's just this vague thing. Well, yeah, the one you read, but that vague article comes from a much broader article where you can actually see when the people had it, you can see what they tested for. And let me clear up a couple of things. There's actually technically 2 clusters right next to each other, which they consider one cluster. There's 3 and 2. Now, when people are saying, oh, well, the one guy didn't even test positive for it, the one guy didn't have, the patient number 2 did not have an autopsy the family refused. That was one of the 2 guys that hunted together. Supposedly there's a little bit of vagary there because they're not giving all of the information on each person because of, there's obviously medical laws in place, but you can kind of infer what's going on there. They did not give him an autopsy. However, his official cause of death is CJD. So it's that he did die from that. So when people in the industry that don't want it to be true start saying, "Oh, well, we don't even no, we do. If you go into the PubMed article, you can see that the only reason that they're able to say that is because he didn't get an autopsy. However, he was tested positive. Now there's patient 4 who received an autopsy but did not get the positive test. So there's like each person went through a different process of getting it because this is such a rare disease.
Yeah.
That when you see a cluster pop up like this is something that we need to take we need to really pay attention to because there's CWD in this area. We know that 2 guys hunted together. We know that 2 guys are eating CWD deer, and we know that these 2 guys died from Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. Yeah. So that's not nothing. That's not to say nothing. So on one hand, I've seen people like someone that I respect a lot and I listen to a lot. I even hesitate to bring up his name because I read everything he writes. I've been following him for a while. Dr. Kroll. He basically brushed this off as probably an AI article. He doesn't want it to be true. He has some biases there, I think. But again, guys, way smarter than me. And I highly recommend following him on Facebook if you want to learn more about CWD. I've learned a lot about CWD from him and from other people that are in the industry on the high fence deer side and in Texas and stuff like that. But you're seeing a lot of people brush this off as, well, we don't know, we're not sure, or well, that can all be true, but it can also be true that we need to pay attention to this because we do have some anecdotal evidence that shows that people are eating CWD deer and now people are dying from it. Let's not pretend like that's nothing.
Oh yeah, it definitely looks like it's very probable. Yeah, there's not when you go to a court case, like most criminal cases are called beyond a shadow of a doubt. But when you're reasonable doubt. But in a civil case, you don't have to have that high of a threshold. It's called a preponderance of evidence, which means that it's like if the evidence is overwhelmingly suggestive that this has happened, you can get a ruling in your favor. So you don't have to have a high of a threshold as a criminal case.
Yes.
So this is almost looking like if all the evidence is starting to point towards this, it almost looks like the preponderance of evidence is very suggestive that this is what is likely to have occurred, so that you can look at it and be like, okay, this is definitely something that you should pay attention to. And it's
now,
something
let me clear something up real quick before we go on from there. At the end of the article on the that most people are referencing, there's like, oh well, they're saying it's not conclusive. Well, if you go into the CDC article, the PubMed article, you start reading all those things, you'll see that what they said is that is true. They said we do not have conclusive evidence here, but we need to do more research on this because it looks like the preponderance evidence or the majority of evidence, and this is something that each person has to weigh individually. Mm-hmm. This isn't something that I can weigh for anybody watching this. If you're watching this and you're like, hey, I'm going to eat it, or I think this is bullcrap, fine, go for it. Like, that's good. I want you to keep hunting. But when you start looking at what your personal risk is going to be, it's similar like the disease that we can't mention without being kicked off of platforms, where everybody got to make their own call. Right? Yeah. Everybody was like, well, we should have been able to make our own call.
Yeah, whether to wear a face diaper or not.
Yes. Like, so if you're doing that, like, you have to make this own call on your own. Is it likely? Now, I want to point something out. because I want to try and keep this in chronological order. We have the mad cow disease goes to humans. We have a bunch of CWD. CWD might have gone to humans, but what we got to remember going back is that the people who got mad cow disease, that they actually contracted it and they proved it. These were people that were eating very high doses, very very high doses of beef. And there's a viral load. Now this does get outside of my realm of expertise. This is more of a inference. This is not. I'm not a doctor, but it seems that
you just play one with your wife.
There's so many edits for Corey, or not. I don't know. But yeah, the more you consume of it, like if somebody is sick and they sneeze directly in your face, your likelihood of getting sick is higher than if they're sitting on the other side of the room from you and you're taking your vitamins and you're young and you're healthy, like all those sorts of things. It makes it less likely for you to get it. It seems the same way for mad cow disease too, where the people who are older tended to get it more. Like I said, and that's that even that I would like to do a little more research on because that could be muddying up the waters with the genetic side.
There could be
things.
Genetic factors making you more predisposition to even catch it.
Yes.
So there's a whole lot of questions I have on that. Is like because if you look at going back to mad cow disease, and going back to the sheer numbers, you start to look at math. Listening to that podcast we did today, they talked about that they estimated between 800 and 900,000 people ate infected beef. Yeah, a beef that was from cows that were infected with mad cow disease.
And this is important. This is important for deer.
Yeah, over probably a decade. 800 to 900,000 people over a decade probably ate infected beef. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of beef. And the number of people that died, that they were conclusive that they could say, yes, these people died of CJD from eating infected beef. There may be more than this, but because of they can't tell, it's hard to weed out the people that died from it, from
random reasons.
But these are the ones that they can actually say 100% sure these are the ones that it jumped the species barrier and infected these people. Do you remember what the number was?
It was not many.
178.
178, yeah. And it was between 1 and 200, yeah.
Yeah, it was 178 people. So I'm going to guess it's probably more than that because of not being... Those are the ones they know for sure. I'm going to say there's probably some more based on that they couldn't tell the difference between the naturally occurring...
Let's say 200, though. 200 out of 8 million is what? How many?
Not 800,000.
Or sorry, 800,000. So just still, let's say that you're talking just on those numbers.
Let's say 1,000.
Yeah, okay, 1,000 out of a million.
Yeah, just
right?
because I don't,
as a percentage, because we're gonna take this to if it jumped the species barrier the same way for cows if it does the same for deer as it does for cows, what's the likelihood of dying from it? Yeah. If it's the exact same, and right now it doesn't seem like it's that high. But let's say that it is, and that we're getting this wrong. Let's just be cautious.
Let's do 800 because that might be easier math.
800 to 800,000. That's still 1 in 1,000.
Yeah.
I mean, 1 in 1,000. If there's hunters, and you're gonna have.
Yeah, but you also got to figure they're having a way higher load of beef. That's over a 10, 15 year period.
Well, not for hunters like me and you that kill tons of deer,
Yeah, and that's...
two.
And percentage wise, almost every single... Like, how many cows had mad cow disease or had the prions in them? So there was probably way more cows with the prions in the cows because it takes a lot of the buildup, like we look at CWD. When a deer is infected with CWD, it can take up to 3 or 4 years before the prions get enough for them to affect the deer where you can actually know.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I want to get into that because this is something I've learned from one thing reading from Dr. Deer and talking to some other people. Dr. Kroll.
Yeah, it has a long, obviously, gestation period. I think that might be the correct term, or incubation. Or,
I don't know what the correct term there is, but I do know that there's captive deer that have lived 10 years with CWD. they've tested them for CWD. They've lived in captivity for 10 years.
Yeah, that's an ideal.
Yeah, these are ideal circumstances. But when people are very out, so there's two things that happen here. One is the death and all of that. The other thing is that there's a whole segment of the hunting population that's super scared of CWD ruining their deer herds. And there's a segment. This kind of gets away from the does it transfer from humans, because that's pretty much what we know of. Does it transfer from humans, from deer to humans? Maybe. We think that it might. There's some suggestive evidence.
But I think
that's where we can leave that.
But this is a good thing to talk about, because we can bring it right back in what I was talking about.
Yeah. So here's the other thing. You have CWD that people in the industry are like, this is going to ruin our deer herds. There's been debates on this. And there's other people like Dr. Deer. I find myself slightly on this side of things, where I'm like, I don't think CWD is that big of a deal for the deer herds. I really don't.
Big a deal for the deer herds.
Yeah, if I can get that out. I don't think it is. I think that the amount of time that a deer lives in the wild, I mean, most of the deer on our property live to 2.5 years old. You know, if you're managing property, 3.5, 4.5, maybe 5.5, these deer can live that long with CWD and not die. They say, you hear this line all the time, oh, it's an always fatal deer disease. CWD is an always fatal deer disease. Now, that may be true, but if a deer can live 10 years with it in ideal conditions, say they can live 5-6 years with it in the wild, we don't know those numbers yet. So when people are like, oh, it's going to ruin our deer herd, that argument doesn't hold weight with me, because most of these deers aren't making it that long anyway. You can't tell a CWD deer for the most part. If in fact, for a long time, people were going, has there ever been a deer die from CWD? Show me a deer that died of natural causes from CWD. This was a very popular line. I think now they have a couple examples of that, but for the most part, deer that get CWD are not dying from CWD. It's not affecting the deer population in the way that some people are scared that it will.
Yeah, they're being shot before they reach that age. They're being killed by coyotes. They're running out in traffic, getting hit by cars, like all deer usually end up dying, because that's the natural mortality of a wild deer.
Yeah.
And does that mean that as the prions eat holes in their brain, does that make them more susceptible to hunters, more susceptible to coyotes, more susceptible to cars?
Could.
That's,
if you look at the actual symptoms of what's happening from people that get it, where they're like, I have brain fog. Man, if that big buck that's over by my tree stand,
I have brain fog.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah.
if that big buck that was by my tree stand had a little bit of brain fog, I would have killed him this year. All right. So maybe there is something to be said. Maybe it makes hunting a little easier for some of us.
You'll need it.
Some of us need it, but.
Yeah.
The point is that while I think you can technically say it's an always fatal deer disease that eventually CWD will kill it,
Yeah.
we don't have a definitive number on how long do deer live. Humans with Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease live for 4 to 6 months. That's not the same with deer. They do live much, much, much longer than humans do with the same type of folded prion disease.
And I believe, if I remember the research, is that cows are similar to the deer in that they live a lot longer. They're not like humans where they live 4 to 6 months. There's a buildup of the prions in there. So to bring that kind of back to, does it affect humans, or does it affect for the jump? Like, so is there a buildup of the proteins in cows that like builds up slowly over time?
Yeah, these are things we just don't know.
So no, what I'm talking about is, so like the older the cows are, they're, I kind of lost where I was going with that.
Yeah, remember that brain fog thing?
Yeah, brain fog.
Maybe you got CW. Hey, it did jump. We just proved it.
No, that's being blown up in Iraq by an Iranian ballistic missile.
But anyways, there's a...
Yeah, I'm just... Okay, I think it kind of came back.
Okay, go ahead.
It's kind of like, like these cows have I'd say a biomass of these prions, so that as the people eat these cows with a higher mass, so they have a higher buyer load, so they can kind of, just like how I want to articulate this. So
it's a complex thing to talk about.
Yeah, because they're getting a whole lot more of these prions introduced into their system than a hunter would get for the maybe one deer he gets per year on average, because that's what most hunters.
And most time, if I'm eating it, me, my kids, my wife. So you're not eating a ton of deer meat. Some people are, but most people are not eating a ton of it.
And it's maybe you'll get one deer that has CWD positive, and then you're not going to have another deer, or maybe, for a while, and possibly, and that depends. Like, the average hunter gets one deer per year, and maybe not one the next year. You're talking about the average hunter, and there's like. There's kind of a Pareto distribution in the amount of hunters. Is like the really good hunters there's less that get more than one deer per year, where most hunters are at the bottom of the pyramid, get one every couple years, and that's just the way it works out. You can look at the data given out by states. I was like, how many hunters get one deer and don't get another deer for another 2 years, or how many?
Like half the hunters kill a deer every year, and it's like 5% of the deer hunters kill like 3 or more. So
so like, and there's some hunters that, kill 4 or 5 every year, and there's some of the poachers that kill 10 every year.
Yeah. We see them riding around in their cars while we're out hunting at night with their spotlights. But the thing is with CWD that we got to remember is we don't know for sure it jumped. Yeah. That's important.
I think
but also,
going back to, I was thinking it's kind of a math problem. What I was kind of getting at is, we're not facing the same math as they were in England.
Okay.
The amount of deer meat that the average hunter is consuming compared to the amount of beef that the average person in Great Britain, Englander, because I think they included all of UK, their entire beef beef system, is a whole lot smaller. So the chances of you getting it from deer, especially the amount of deer that are infected, because it's not the entire deer population in the U.S. So unless you're hunting in a CWD zone, it's like the amount of deer meat compared to the amount of beef is a whole lot smaller than. Yeah,
it's a smaller percentage of deer of infected meat that you're eating if you're a hunter than if you were in Great Britain.
So it's like you got to look at that as, is deer meat safe? Comparatively, if you could take the math from Great Britain and compare it to the math for CWD, I think you have to take that in consideration, consider is deer meat safe? And I think the amount that you're going to like ingest and take into your body, it probably is safer than the amounts that it took to.
Now let's jump into that though.
But safety.
Let's jump into that a little bit, because you're right about the numbers. But on top of the numbers, you also have. I've seen a lot of the things going out there. Oh, cook deer meat to 165 degrees and you'll be fine. First off, prions don't die till 900 degrees for like hours. So this is not the same. You cannot cook your deer meat to 165. You can't cook it. You can't burn it and still get rid of it and eat it.
That's a cremating. Put it in an urn on your. That's put an urn on your mantelpiece.
Yes. So no, cooking your deer meat to a safe temperature does not kill the prions. Let's get that out of the way. Also, there's a couple other things. There's certain places where there's more prions than others. The brains, the back of the eyes. This is one of the things that they test when they're looking for where did Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease come from. Is they go back and they look and they test all these things in these patients on the PubMed article. Hey, did you have an eye surgery? Did you have a brain surgery? Did you have any of these things? Like, was there any transplants done? They look at all that stuff to make sure it didn't happen. So in deer, don't be eating the back of deer eyeballs like I had my daughter do. Maybe don't be eating deer brain or the spinal columns. That's where a lot of these prions are. Now, it seems to me that there's going to be, this stuff's going to be through the whole body. If it's positive and you don't want to eat the deer, I don't blame you. Yeah. But there is some safety precautions that you had referenced at the beginning of this, where if you just kind of set it aside and go, okay, well, I'm a little worried. I'm going to get it tested, but you know what? I'm going to debone my neck. I'm going to keep the head safe. I'm going to do, I'm not going to eat the eyeballs to anybody who was thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of states in the CWD zone will let you send in to get the meat tested
for free. Ohio's free.
Ohio's free, and I've heard Wisconsin. I don't know for sure, but I've heard a lot of states in this will get it tested, and if it comes back positive, we'll renew your tag. I don't know that for sure for all the states, but I think I've heard some will do that. Okay. So you'll get your tag refunded, and you'll be able to get, go hunt again with that tag. And you'll be able to, get rid of the meat.
Okay, so let's kind of recap this real quick and then go into what an actual solution for this, an actual real solution for the wild population for CWD that's coming from high fence deer hunting. So basically what we know for sure is there's a correlation between people getting dying from CW, contracting it, that it's making the jump. There is a correlation. It's not definitive. It's more of a correlation than a lot of people want to believe. But it's also not definitive. Both of those two things can be true at once.
Yeah.
Also, there's some precautions you can take to make sure that you're safe.
Yeah.
And you can get everything tested. So there's all of those things are true.
Yes.
You cannot prove that this didn't happen. You can't 100% prove that it did.
More research is definitely needed.
All the doctors are saying that. More research is needed because it looks like this happened.
And we should definitely pay attention to it, and also, be cautious because it's...
Because here's the main reason we need to pay attention is because there are actual solutions. Now, for the last 10 years, I've heard people talk about, what are we going to do about CWD? Can we come up with a vaccine? Can we do this? Can we do that? What if we let the population just run wild, and then the deer that get it will die younger, the deer that don't will keep going? Well, that actually isn't going to work because we shoot deer so young that if it's being passed on, these prions are passed through saliva. So deer, they communicate through pee, saliva, all that. Like they if you ever watched a buck walk over, he rubs his legs together, he pees all down the back of his legs, and then other deer come over and snip it. Like it's passed, and when a prion goes into the ground,
they have a licking branch.
Yes, you've seen deer. I've watched bucks come up and just drool all over a branch, and the next buck comes up and drools all over and sniffing it. This stuff's gonna get passed. These deer have their noses in the prions, and they do not die. So if it's on the ground,
the prions can last for years in the soil.
Yes. Now, me and you went. We're going to get to this solution in just a second, but let me take a little sidetrack here. Me and you went hunting in a CWD zone, and it's been a CWD zone for 5 or 6 years.
I think 5.
5,
give or take.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's right around there.
At least 5.
And it was at where was it?
Oh shoot, no, where is it?
I forget where. It was in Ohio.
Was it Deer Creek Wildlife Area?
Yes, I think so. I think that's what it was. So we went there hunting, and basically every year they go out and they kill all the deer off this property. They have extra tags in the public land that's next to it. They wipe out tons of deer. You go look at the numbers year over year.
Yeah, it's in the wildlife preserve. It's
Western Ohio, and it's in the wildlife preserve. And they basically go in and they kill as many deer as they can. You go in there, you shoot all these deer. Week 1, they kill a bunch of deer. Week 2, they kill half as many deer. Week 3, they don't kill very many deer. By week 6, 7, 8, like when we were there on the last week, we didn't see anything. There was no. We heard like what, one shot the whole day, and it's just free range for hundreds of acres. Like, I know how to hunt. I can find these deer.
We saw 2 sets of tracks we had what, how many acres could we had
like 150, 200 acres?
200 acres we could range on, and we were looking for tracks, any sign. We found 2 sets of fresh tracks, and by fresh tracks, we mean they were at least 2 days old.
Yeah, and and everywhere there was muddy. So if there was deer in there, you'd be seeing them. Now, what happened was, every year the deer come back. Every year the deer are testing positive for CWD, and every year they're killing all the deer off this property. So just simply killing all of the deer isn't going to get rid of CWD because deer, their populations expand. They're going back into these areas. They're gonna be licking on the same branches. They're gonna be scraping the same areas. Deer have patterns, and they're gonna contract it again. So this thing, and I know people in the hunting industry are not gonna like me. Some people, it doesn't make sense to me that this idea of just let's kill all the deer, and then if we kill all the deer, then we can save all the deer. Like, well, this doesn't seem to make sense because these prions last for years and years, and if any deer comes by, you get one, it starts all over. It's never gonna work. Now, I found and talked to a guy who owns a high fence deer operation. He's a deer farmer, and he specializes in growing typical bucks. And he has these giant typical bucks. We're going to go through. He agreed to come on the podcast. Real cool guy, very knowledgeable. Gave me a lot of facts and data about CWD. An important thing to remember is that with CWD on these deer farms, they genetically test these deer. Okay, so they have isolated a gene in some deer, and it's around, I want to say he said 30%. I'd have to, when we do the podcast, we'll get all the exact numbers. But there's a percentage of deer that are CWD resistant. So they'll be in a high fence deer farm where they're all together, and every single time that a deer is tested positive for this one genetic marker, they have never contracted CWD. Now, if you get CWD in one of these deer farms, they come in and make you kill all of the deer. Well, what these people are, the argument they're making is, hey, wait, we have a gene that's resistant to this. Kill all the ones that had CWD. Fine. Let's take all the ones that don't have CWD, that can't get CWD. Let them go. Let them go. Let them go populate in these wild areas, and you're gonna pass that gene on more and more and more. You're gonna have a higher and higher percentage of deer that are resistant and that can't get CWD. And this is all coming from high fence deer farms. As much as people are gonna sit there and go, "Oh, I hate high fence deer farms," I've never hunted them. I've got some interesting opinions on it now. Actually, talking to people, and we're gonna get into that.
Especially with those ones with those big, giant, typical racks.
What do you mean, the non-typical ones?
Yeah, introduce those genetics as well.
Yeah,
just kidding.
Yeah, just down at my property. Sure.
Yeah, but look, yeah, I see what you're saying.
So these places actually have a real solution. Vaccinating deer, killing all the deer to save the deer. These aren't solutions. These things are not. It doesn't make any logical sense to kill all the deer to save the deer when you know that you can't get rid of the disease. But if you could isolate this, which they have, and they've proven this, if you can isolate it, release those deer. Why go into these places and just wipe out all the deer? Keep the ones that have this genetic marker, and you have these deer farms that are growing these deer. Let more of those genes spread. Let the genes that are resistant to CWD spread. That's the only, and maybe that's not the right solution. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I will say it's the only good solution I've heard, because killing all the deer to save the deer hasn't worked out at all in Wisconsin, at all. I mean, that place is loaded with CWD. And they've been trying to do that for years. It's not working. You're failing and failing and failing. You got to try something different.
Yeah, I don't see how it. I've been trying to, I consider myself a semi-smart guy. Well, smarter before Iraq, but still a smart guy. And I've been trying to figure out the logic behind killing the deer. The only thing I can think of is, can we slow the spread enough till we figure out something?
Yeah. 15 days to slow the spread, right?
Yeah.
How'd that work out for us?
I know. That's the only thing that seems to make sense.
But nothing's come. We've been talking about this problem for decades
I know that
now.
When we were, because we left that hunt early, it was I could go sit and, even though we could take shotguns to go hunt this
during
place.
bow season. We had shotguns during bow season to go in 200 acres, and we couldn't kill a deer.
And
we couldn't even see a deer.
I'm I could go back and hunt my other property with a crossbow and have a better chance of killing a deer because there was no deer on this preserve. On the wildlife preserve.
Yeah.
So I'm let's just go at lunchtime because there's really no deer here.
Exactly.
It was half flooded because of the snow melt.
Yeah, but that should have made the deer easier for us to find.
I know. I thought so. I'm okay, half of it's flooded, so they should be confined to the smaller areas.
There was just no deer there.
They killed them all the first couple of weeks, and
every single year they come back, and every single year they test all the deer that are killed there. Every single year they get more and more positive cases.
Yeah, so it's clearly not working. So it's
somebody make me, and if anybody could come on this podcast or even call me, get a hold of me, comment on the Hunting News on Facebook, because make this make sense to me. It's not working. Yeah. What am I missing here? Somebody, I would love to hear somebody argue this with me.
I want an explanation. I'm the same way as I have racked my brain trying to figure out why. What's the point? Why make it make sense? I want it to make sense because I want deer hunting to thrive, and it's not thriving doing it this way. And so it's not like I, have an ulterior motive, we shouldn't be doing this, because if it worked, I would be all for it.
We've had CWD since the 60s. And we're going to get into where it started. There's a big podcast coming on that.
Oh yeah, put on your tinfoil hats for this one, because there's some people that have them with where it started. It's the dang government.
Listen.
It could be.
I'm telling you, I was blown away when I found out the real facts behind this stuff, and the proven facts, not just the conspiracy theories behind it, but the real hard evidence of it. I'm this is scary. But that aside, we don't have a good solution. I see one possible solution, and it involves hunters that are hunting wild deer populations teaming up with these high fence deer hunters that they talk crap about all the time and actually getting something done.
Truthfully, that's the best solution I've heard. It may not be perfect because it's basically the long game.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take a while to breed CWD out.
Yeah. You may never breed it completely out.
No, but it's at least something.
Like we said, if with the viral load, essentially. So if you get a bunch of deer, like Wisconsin, that's been trying this for years, they have CWD in half the deer, maybe more than that state. When you have all those deer with CWD, I mean, could you get it down to 10%?
Yeah,
20%? Could you? I mean, that's something that's still up in the air, but at least it's a new solution, something that's shown some evidence to work, and that we could push forward with, and at least experimentally try it, as opposed to doing the same thing that hasn't worked for decades.
Yeah, I kind of just thought about this when we were talking about the unmentionable disease that kept us all in our houses, when they were talking about natural immunity and herd immunity. Once you introduce these immune deer and they start breeding and hopefully creating other immune deer as they pass on this genetics, you're going to have, sooner or later, you're going to reach a threshold where it's going to be less and less likely to be passing on these prions.
Yeah.
So, eventually a herd will reach herd immunity. You would think. I'm not a biologist or a immunologist, but it's, we kind of all at least have some at least familiarity with how vaccines and immunizations work over the last few years.
Yeah.
So because we kind of were slammed with it 24/7 on all of our news feeds, and it's like, oh, you must we got to reach you, everybody needs to be jabbed to reach herd immunity.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't it work? It's going to take a while to for buck A to breed with doe B, and
So let me
release these giant bucks. Maybe you shouldn't release the giant bucks. Release
all the does that have it.
No, you're gonna have to release the bucks because
Well, they actually have some research on how it's passed and from male to
I'm just saying because a buck will breed more does.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but a doe can only have one or two.
So
but never twins.
Just so everybody knows our opinions on this, it's not proven that CWD's jumped from deer to humans, but the evidence is mounting towards that, the same way that with mad cow disease, it wasn't proven until it was. There are some safety precautions to take. So if you are hunting these areas, if you do, get your deer tested, take the precautions, or don't. It's up to you. Maybe you'll be our next podcast. I don't know, but just remember, there are a lot more cases of this in in the United States. About 350 to 500 per year. The average is going up, but
CJD.
CJD. Yeah, sorry. There's tons of cases of CWD, but of CJD in humans, it is more and more. But the testing is getting better, so we're finding it more. Take precautions. We don't know for sure it jumped. But we are seeing mounting evidence that it might have, and all of these doctors said the same thing. This is looking a little sketchy to me, so let's do some more research on this and see if we can prove it out. And that's kind of where we have to leave it. But also remember, when you're seeing a lot of these things online, there's people that have a bias towards not wanting it to be true. If they're selling hunting products, if you have a hunting podcast, I don't want it to be true. If you love hunting, you don't want it to be true. Doesn't mean it's not true. It means that we don't know. That's the reality of it. I'm still going to eat my deer. Even if I was hunting in a CWD zone, I'd still eat the deer. I'd probably debone the neck and, not eat the eyeballs. And
I probably wouldn't even eat the tongue. I don't know if that's safe.
I'd probably leave that alone too.
Have you ever eaten tongue?
I've eaten cow tongue, but not, or no, I did eat deer tongue.
Yeah, it's good.
It was okay. I didn't cook it right. But anyways,
big surprise.
So be careful. Pay attention. We're going to update this as soon as we get more information. There's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of rumors. It's not a vague article. There is the PubMed article. There is the neurology. I got to stop doing that. The neurology.org article.
That's about your
the the CDC article. There's a lot more information on it. And we didn't even get into the fact that a lot of the people in this cluster also had other family members. There's actually 4 other people inside of that family, or in that friend group there, that contracted it over the last 10 years. So there's actually more to this, but I don't have, that's proven, but it's not, I don't have enough. I don't feel comfortable bringing it up in a way that draws a connection towards jumping from deer to humans, but there is even more evidence. And as it mounts, pay attention to it, and let's have a fair discussion on it, and realize that a lot of people pushing that this couldn't be true have a lot of money to lose if it is. If any hunting company out there, if hunting drops because people think they can die from eating deer, your profits drop, your influence drops. What you've built your life around starts to fall away. And that is a big factor that we have to remember here, ourselves included. That's why we tried to take a fair stance here. Tried to look at both sides. I'm still eating my deer. Most people are still eating their deer. And even if it has made the jump, your likelihood of getting it is very small. But let's start talking about solutions for CWD. And that's going to be one of our next podcasts coming up here really soon, is talking about the solution. We got a brief mention of it there, but we're going to talk about it in more depth with more facts. And we have a lot of science behind this one. So we're going to be doing that here shortly, but that podcast is going to take, I've read a lot on it already, but I really want to do a lot of research before I really do the podcast and talk to a few more people.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So anyways, be careful out there. Let us know what you think about this. Comment. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. Also follow the show notes we're going to have. Subscribe to us on YouTube. On the Hunting News is where we're going to be talking about this. We'll reply to the comments is on the Hunting News. We're going to ask you what you thought about it, and we're going to go back and forth. I think that open discussion is the best way to get to not just what is the government telling us, not just what is the hunting industry telling us, or what, Joe down the road's telling us, but what the real facts are, when we can all come together and kind of talk about it. So on the Hunting News on Facebook, when you see those posts, we'll be engaging with those things and hopefully having some good discussions with you guys. And to those that think it's nonsense, keep eating deer. To those that are worried about it, don't hunt by me. I'll shoot those deer. So thanks, guys. Let us know what you think. Thanks a lot, guys.